And not only this photo right here, what if I was to tell you that Stephanie White made it her business during Caitlin Clark debut of her signature sneaker to have on some custom sneakers? Oh, yes, she did, of her own. She had on some custom sneakers that said her name, except they was just shoes she had made. We could get these shoes made. Let's watch this.
Look at Stephanie White's shoes. Oh, you can't see.
In sports, there are times when the scoreboard becomes irrelevant. Times when the most significant story is not about wins, rebounds, or points. T has to do with relationships and trust. Additionally, the current relationship between Caitlin, the tale involving Stephanie White, Sophie Cunningham, and Clark has grown to be one of the most closely followed in professional basketball. Arriving as a transformational superstar was Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark attracted unheard of attention, unprecedented expectations and ratings. Every action taken by Caitlin Clark generates headlines across the country. Frame by frame, every response from Caitlin Clark is examined. But as the season has progressed, concerns about Stephanie White has just gotten more intense. There isn't a single game that has caused the anxiety. The stress has arisen from a pattern in a single interview and an expanding compilation of moments featuring Stephanie and Caitlin Clark White, which fans are still debating. Sophie Cunningham then joined the discussion, in contrast to many players who remained silent. Sophie Cunningham publicly voiced concerns about offensive modifications when uproar arose, as well as tactical adaptability. These remarks quickly became a part of a much wider conversation about the leadership of Stephanie White. Every sideline exchange involving Caitlin Clark is now closely examined. All of Sophie Cunningham's expressions are analyzed. Each coaching choice made by Stephanie White becomes a component of evidence in a riddle that is getting harder to solve. Because when a generational athlete is the center of a franchise, like Caitlin Clark, minor plot points can become into significant ones very fast. Additionally, what makes this circumstance? What's so intriguing is that Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark are more than just teammates vying for victory games. They are now at the center of a discussion about accountability, leadership, and communication, and a franchise's overall future course. The existence of pressure is not the question. The inquiry is whether that pressure is starting to shatter the Indiana Fever's basis.
Sophie and Caitlin. Now, Sophie Cunningham, another player that has been on record and called out Stephanie White publicly. Something pretty much Caitlin ain't ever done. Caitlin call her out like in a game, yell at her, and footage would come up, and we be like, damn, Caitlin mad at Stephanie. But Sophie actually went on record to mainstream media, to journalists, like Stephanie White likes to recall people journalists, and she basically delivered.
One cannot stress the importance of Sophie Cunningham's remarks. Although Caitlin Clark has frequently, Sophie Cunningham used a different approach to expressing her dissatisfaction during the intense competition. Sophie Cunningham talked about strategic issues immediately. Sophie Cunningham talked about offensive constraints. Sophie Cunningham proposed changes were required. And as soon as those remarks occurred, they attracted notice since they seemed to question Stephanie White's method. Those remarks were significant to Caitlin Clark. Not always because Caitlin Clark openly supported them, but because Sophie Cunningham was raising issues that many spectators thought were affecting every player on the squad. In the end, basketball is a system-based game. The system of a coach can maximize talent. Talent might also be limited by a coach's system. Which of those is at the heart of the Stephanie White controversy? For Caitlin Clark, reality is what it is right now. Playing quickly helped Caitlin Clark establish her reputation. Caitlin Clark gained notoriety by upsetting defenders. Caitlin Clark rose to fame because opponents were never able to foresee her next move. When a creative player shows signs of discomfort, fans start looking for answers right away. Was Caitlin Clark being used appropriately? Did Stephanie White put in enough? In Caitlin Clark's hands, freedom. Did Sophie Cunningham see a real strategic issue? These inquiries started to acquire traction. And once concerns about leadership begin to arise, every subsequent occurrence is scrutinized from a very different perspective. Every replacement, timeout, and sideline conversation. Every apparent disagreement. All of a sudden, Stephanie White was being assessed as more than just a coach. Stephanie White, who was in charge of overseeing the most significant player, was being assessed. In basketball for women, that obligation has far-reaching implications because if Caitlin Clark succeeds, credit goes to Stephanie White. However, if Caitlin Clark seems irritated, every coaching choice becomes a target. That's what it's like to train a superstar. Additionally, as Sophie Cunningham's remarks spread, the spotlight became much brighter. One game was no longer the topic of conversation. The conversation was turning into one concerning the franchise's own future course. Now, keep in mind that I told you that it was footage and everything. Emerging. In one word, describe this picture of Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark from last night. Take a look at this. Take a look at this. Look at Sophie and think, ugh, this is awful. Look at Sophie and think, Caitlin, don't do it. Now that this picture has been released. Correct. Additionally, Caitlin snapped at Stephanie White. There are many iconic events in sports history that never needed phrases. Interviews weren't always necessary for Michael Jordan. Statements weren't always necessary for Kobe Bryant. Press conferences weren't always necessary for Tom Brady. Body language may convey a lot of information. And for that reason, the pictures involving Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark attracted a lot of attention. Fans weren't doing statistical analysis. Fans were examining reactions and expressions rather than sophisticated analytics. They were researching observable emotions. Looking at pictures of Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, with Stephanie White, they thought they were witnessing the emergence of frustration in real time. Whether those interpretations. Since public discourse is frequently shaped by perception, accuracy became nearly secondary. Regarding Caitlin Clark, more than most athletes, perception is important. Caitlin Clark is followed by every camera. Every broadcast follows Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark's emotional responses all lead to contentment, which creates an unfeasible atmosphere. A single obvious argument between Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark can make news for days. Sophie Cunningham's facial expressions have the power to start thousands of conversations on social media. And that is precisely what took place. Observers started tying disparate events together to form a more comprehensive story. A story that implies mounting stress, frustration, and Caitlin. Sophie Cunningham and Clark were growing more and more unhappy, a superstar player in the past. The relationships between coaches determine titles. Coaches and Magic Johnson. Coaches and LeBron James. Coaches and Diana Taurasi. Stronger communication is the reason why great businesses endure, rather than confrontation. Stephanie White's problem is that her interactions with Caitlin Clark are now more intense. Importance. Every emotional reaction is amplified, which presents a problem for Caitlin Clark. Sophie Cunningham's problem is that her remarks are still seen as proof in a more extensive discussion. That's the current atmosphere around this team, whether it's fair or unfair, setting in which perception can grow to be nearly as strong as reality. Everything about this circumstance is terrible. I can't even tell you a lie, I don't think this will end nicely. I am aware that many Indiana Fever supporters watch the channel. I'm aware that many Indiana Fever supporters back Caitlin Clark, but I had to be honest with you all. I don't think Caitlin Clark will complete her contract. By the end of this, Caitlin Clark might request a trade. I firmly think that's the case. It was Angel Reese. The Caitlin Clark brand is simply too large. And everything they're doing at the moment is damaging her reputation. Caitlin Clark's ranking in Popularly Broke is 5th. Today's dispute is not the main problem. The game tomorrow isn't the biggest problem. The future is the main concern. Since Caitlin Clark is more than just a player, Caitlin Clark is a powerful force in the economy. Attendance is impacted by Caitlin Clark.